balancing act not to desense myself here. That's just probably going to happen when I transmit. How's the audio level from the internet link? Are those fine?
Go through, like Robert said, but in terms of volume and quality, it's fine when it does come through.
Thanks. And how's the volume?
Thing. Here for internal purposes, it's fine. Offline.
The 86WH, are we good to go? Roger, KG6NUB. Okay, this is 86WH, Alpha Golf 6 Whiskey Hotel, John Pauly. And this is the W6YX monthly radio meeting. And so we have a special guest tonight, but before that, I'd like to first tell you a little bit about how to connect via the internet. And if Sasan's here, NUB, could you let people know how to connect over the internet? Yeah, Roger. Thanks, John. I hope I'm making it in okay. KG6NUB. It's pretty straightforward. If you're on the internet, you need to give your call sign twice, just because we're using voice activation, Vox activation, and it's a little slow, so your first part of your call sign is going to get eaten up. So give your call sign slow, and also don't wait too long. If you wait more than a second or two pause, it's going to also drop the carrier. So give your call sign at a normal pace and twice. And then whatever message you say will get broadcasted over the repeater. Back to net control. Okay, so we've got quite a few people connected. Let's see. Susan, should we do logins or should we just go to the speaker? Check-ins, just so everyone knows who's here. The radio people don't know who the internet people are, and vice versa. Okay, well,
let's go through check-ins. So please give your call signs, and we'll take a couple of call signs, and then I'll go through and ask you to introduce yourself. So, so if you'd like to check in, please just give your call sign.
KX6 Tango.
A6 India Tango Victor, let me suggest you call by suffix there, John.
Okay, go ahead, KX6 Tango.
Checking in for the meeting. Lane is the name.
Welcome, Lane. ITV. Hi, Leah.
Hi, John. WA6ITV, Leah Roberts, and Stanford ARES. Emergency coordinator, I just sent out an invitation to everyone for Saturday morning. Come play if you can.
Yeah, and let me second that. That's Saturday morning, 10 to 12, to practice some emergency radio stuff. Any other call signs wish to check in?
K9TTL, Kilo 9 Tango Tango Lima.
Lima. Kilo Delta 2 Sierra Sierra Lima, checking in online.
Okay, TTV, could you tell us your name and where you're calling from?
My call sign is K9TTL. My name is William, and I'm calling from Palo Alto.
And KD2SSL, where are you calling from?
I'm calling in from Redwood City. This is SSL.
And your name is?
My name is James.
Welcome, James. Great to hear you. Any other call signs that wish to check in?
Alpha Golf 6 Whiskey.
Go ahead. 6W.
This is Alpha Golf 6 Whiskey, still from Berkeley.
Good. Are you calling in direct?
No, I'm on the repeater. Over.
Okay, well, welcome. Great to have people from Berkeley. How about N7MH?
MH, Mike in Palo Alto.
Welcome. What was that name again?
Mike India Kilo Echo.
Alpha Hotel Lima. Could you go again? You didn't get out over the air. I heard you over the other link on the computer.
3AHZ. Reporting one line.
Okay, is there anyone else that would wish to check in? Please give your call sign.
Will you 6 Norway?
There was a double there. Please go again.
No.
G6NUB.
Go ahead, NUB.
Thanks, John. Name is Hassan. Maybe you want to separate the repeater check-ins from the internet check-ins to avoid KG6NUB back to net control.
That's a great idea, Susan. We'll do that. There was a check-in from N6DB. Let's do that one next.
Evening, everybody. November 6th, Delta Bravo.
Hi. Thanks for checking in. Nice to hear you. And then there was a W6 that doubled earlier. Please try again.
Will you 6 Norway? And Barb K6BL also standing by here.
Okay, acknowledge and thank you. All right, so let's do just logins through the repeater over the air. So are any call signs that wish to log in over the air?
Alpha India 6, X-ray Mike.
Head X-ray Mike.
Handle is Dave, checking in to enjoy the presentation this evening. Thank you very much. AI6XM, back to net.
Welcome, XM. Any other over-the-air check-ins?
Alpha Julia 6, India Victor.
India Victor.
Hi everyone, Leeson, calling from Menlo Park, I guess. I'm the current president of W6YX.
Great to hear you. Thanks a lot for calling in. Any other over-the-air check-ins?
KG4UHM.
Go ahead, UHM.
Hi, my name's Robert. I'm checking in from Palo Alto. Back to net control. This is KG4UHM.
Nice to hear you, UHM. Any other over-the-air check-ins? Okay, let's go to the internet then. Any other internet check-ins?
Alpha Zulu Golf?
No, I didn't get Alpha Zulu Golf. Please go ahead, Alpha Zulu Golf.
Alpha Zulu Papa.
And where are you calling in from?
You would normally hear me from Redwood City. Today it's Arizona.
Well, welcome. Great to hear you. Are there any other logins over the internet? Did anyone pick up any more people trying to log in?
Net Control, this is November 6th, Delta Bravo. Did you copy Alpha Zulu Papa from, I think it was Arizona?
I didn't. Go ahead, Alpha Zulu Papa.
Okay, this is Al, WA6 Alpha Zulu. Normally in Redwood City, tonight I'm in Scottsdale.
Okay, thanks a lot for tuning in. Yeah, sorry about the confusion. Okay. Go ahead, N60B.
Yeah, it sounded like he was originally from Redwood City, but he's calling in from Scottsdale, Arizona, 73, or QSL.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any other stations that wish to check in, either on the air or over the network? I think we've got most of the network people at this point. Okay, hearing none, is there anyone from the club who would like to say anything before we get started with the presentation? Okay, hearing none, we'll get started with the presentation. And tonight we have Dave Leeson, who's going to tell us a little bit about amateur radio and his history with it. If you are interested in looking at the slides, they're available on the W6YX website. When you go to the front page, in the middle of the page, there's a link for slides for May 12th meeting available here. And if you click on that, uses of for amateur radio, you'll get the slides. Dave Leeson has been involved with the club for a very long time. He's the license holder for W6YX and has a long history with amateur radio. And so tonight he's going to tell us a little bit about that and his history and other stories. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave Leeson.
Okay, thanks, John. This is W6NL, W6 Norwood SEMA. And I hope that somebody downloaded the slides early. They've gone back and gotten the Rev 2. I had a computer crunch that somehow destroyed one slide, but it's in the new Rev 2 set that's online. Listening to this, we had for many years trouble with our telephone system here, our landline system. Finally, we gave up and got a VoIP set. It has latency so long that it's kind of come full circle, and you have to say over and not interrupt because you can't tell who's talking with. And I'm amused to be back full circle to a similar situation here. I'll try to let the carrier drop from time to time, and also I'll try to remember to ID occasionally. Anyhow, good evening all. John, good to hear you, and Robert, thanks for setting this up. And Stephen, along with Anita and Sarah, I really appreciate your willingness to serve as officers of what I think may be the club with the longest continuous history at Stanford. We're approaching our 100th anniversary, and it's had a lot of interesting stories. Tonight, I want to focus on the career uses and benefits of amateur radio, rather than the other obvious enjoyments and the obvious public service of amateur radio emergency service. And I want to do it partly or largely from the viewpoint of my own experience and that of some others that I've known. It's a rewarding hobby, but again, I want to look at it more as a potential vehicle for career-enhancing experiences and connections. As John mentioned, I've been a ham for most of my life, and I've enjoyed and learned a lot from building a mountaintop station here with Barb in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And also the club station that John mentioned I'm the license holder of, and also a contesting station, a big station that she and I and two other friends with many helpers built on a mountaintop in the Galapagos Islands and operated for more than a decade. All of these have involved tests of practical technology and project management, and while the results have been very gratifying, I'd say, moreover, that the experiences have had a very direct impact on any success I've had in my own professional career, which wasn't something I thought of at the time. And I'll break for questions at the end, so don't distract me while I'm trying to remember what I had to say, but I'll certainly take some then. Also, I'll break occasionally to make sure we're still all connected. If you have the slides from the talk, you've seen the pictures of the three stations that I mentioned. On the left, our station at home above the clouds. In the middle, the W6YX station with a historic QSL cart. And on the right, the station that we built from scratch, including teaching our local host how to weld towers out of pipe and how to spray them with can after can of zinc spray. So that station has since rusted out, and we've left it to be kind of an archaeological setup. With all of us kind of hunkered down with the isolation from the coronavirus, one of the thoughts that occurred to me is that this is not the first time this has happened. In the mid-1600s, when the plague was widely moving about England, a guy named Newton went home to his farm in Woolthorpe and did some pretty good work. So maybe this is a time where people can step aside from their ordinary cares and do some really heavy thinking. No guarantee, but just thought I'd mention it. So tonight my spotlight is on how amateur radio can play a direct role in the chain of events, the chain of contingent events that form a career. And I want to use some experiences as examples. Now, I'm assuming that you're all connected with Stanford in one way or another because you have career aspirations, and that gives how you got here. Maybe at the end I'd like to hear a snippet or two of how that happened, and also think about how you hope to affect where you're headed. So with a view that a career, and in fact a life, is formed by a chain of significant events, and many that aren't, or don't turn out to be. Each of these events is dependent on the outcome of a prior event, much like evolution. And I'd like to lead you through some thoughts about how to be ready to recognize and even benefit from this kind of a milestone when it presents itself. Among other opportunities and possibilities and avocation, provides the opportunity to explore technologies and projects and management and connections, but it allows you especially to take risks in a safe and very supportive culture where you aren't being formally tested or graded, where there isn't big money on the line. And as I prepared this talk, it occurred to me that that's what I really want to emphasize tonight, the opportunity to use amateur radio to take risks and have experiences and make connections that aren't being let me check, am I coming through okay?
You are now. It dropped out for just a little bit there, but you're just fine now.
I've been dropping carrier from time to time, but I'll stop, and if he misses something, hopefully not a gem, I'll back up. So let me talk about some strategic concepts, because strategy is something that I had to learn in running a company, but then over the years in the courses I've taught, I've emphasized that it's something that applies to a personal career as well. And there are two major concepts that I want to focus on. One is called segmentation, and the other is differentiation. And in order to understand those, imagine your career as an entrepreneurial startup. And at this point, you can't hope to compete in a worldwide market such as automobiles because you don't have the resources of General Motors or Volkswagen. But you can pick a part of the market in which you're constructively differentiated. That is, you've got a specific background and interests and skills and experience, and also by the fact you don't have an overhang of existing commitments. So you don't have the responsibilities that Volkswagen has or General Motors has. So you're ready to go to work for a customer whose needs correspond to your differentiation. A good example, local example, is Tesla. So you can sort of see how this works. Tesla's not in the whole auto market. They're in a segment. They approach it differently, and so they're differentiated. And they have been a success so far. Carrier drop there. So the same concepts work for a personal career. If you have a specific area in which you develop your capabilities and publications, you can hope to stand out in your specialty. And nobody can hope to be all things to all markets or all people, but you can certainly be good at what you do, and you can get better at it. It's even better if you have more than one major skill or interest, because the number of people who have either one is much greater than the number of potential competitors who have both. You can imagine a little Venn diagram, and the overlap in the center is where you'd like to have two skills and not a whole lot of other people do. So the competition is greatly reduced. So where does amateur radio come in? Well, you hope to learn from every test and experience, but as I said, an avocation allows you to try things you might not otherwise be invited to do, or even allowed to do, or even care to take the risk to do. And of course, it turns out that everybody experiences the fact that you learn more from problems and failures and things that go wrong, because resolving them is really prime learning. And I'm in mind of when I was teaching a lab, how the most of the learning came when stuff didn't work. And when it did work, people kind of brushed right past it, and maybe they might even have gotten less out of it than out of a failure. The lessons in a permissive sphere like amateur radio, and in my case I'm also going to mention amateur auto racing, not only can you do things you wouldn't be able to do in a professional context, but they're professional level. They can apply to other situations where it might not be advisable or even permitted to experiment. And I have in mind, when I was running a company, my board was very upset that I was racing a car, and they said, if you would quit, the stock will soar. And so eventually I did retire because I'd met all my objectives, and the stock didn't move an inch. But anyhow, that was the attitude that prevailed, and avocation was really a great benefit. Another element of career strategy that I'm sure many of you have experienced is the great benefit of mentors, and especially of sponsors. A sponsor is a mentor who will introduce you into a situation where you might not have access yourself. They'll vouch for you, or even bring you into a situation that you might not even be able to go through the door on your own. And when people ask, high school folks ask about choosing a college or a grad school, I generally recommend looking for a place that has a recognized mentor that you would hopefully benefit from in your intended specialty. Doesn't always work that way, but it's one way to think about it. But such an individual isn't able to respond to everyone who'd like their attention. You can imagine it's very asymmetrical. So real mentors, and especially real sponsors, are very hard to find, and even harder to convince that you're worth their interest. They're people that will make a big difference in your academic and subsequent career. And if you identify one, it's really worth all your effort to respond. If they respond, you owe it to yourself to respond with as vigorous attention in their area of interest. And you're especially likely to attract a mentor or a sponsor if you share interests and experiences. So that's where amateur radio can offer a bridge. Now, from our history at Stanford and from my own career, there are some examples that are models of the best outcome from an association formed through amateur radio. I'll mention in more detail two of the many Nobel laureates who have ham radio backgrounds, both of whom I know. One is Joe Taylor, K1JT, and the other is Professor Morner, W.E. Morner, WN6I. And among the many personalities that have taken a ham radio beginning and made great contributions, David Packard, whom I knew, and William Hanson, who I didn't, but whose biographer I am still working to be, stand out for me. And I'll talk a little more about what how they brought ham radio into their life. And last, although I can't compare my own career to these real stars, I certainly have benefited from sponsorship that led directly to access that I wouldn't have had without it. So I really want to focus on this idea of how mentors and sponsors in amateur radio can be a benefit if you seek them out. And then the last and very valid question that I want to talk about is whether amateur radio can still provide that same boost today when computers and wireless communications are ubiquitous and easy. Why would anybody want to get on the air and talk to somebody in Singapore or Austria when they could just pick up the phone or, get on the web or send an email or whatever? Or, we've been zooming around here ourselves and watching how that is taking over the communication sphere. But I hope to convince you that the answer for amateur radio is yes, is still yes, but it depends on you. So I'll drop the carrier here. And John, again, you might mention if I've had any major dropouts. Let me make an example from my own experiences. You take a look at what's numbered slide 3. Oops, sorry. Let me back up. Let me talk about slide 2 a bit. The ability to make and break stuff is there in ham radio. And I've taught in my classes, especially my lab class, that experiment trumps theory. And that doing things hands-on and is rewarding, and it's educating, and it brings you to a practical side of things. I still remember students who would look at through a waveguide and say, well, I know all about the theory of waveguide, but I've never held one in my hand. And the other pleasant experiences using what you have put together. Radio technologies are unique, and all around the world are people who have skills in software and computers and making products for the internet infrastructure, but not as many people have interest in the sort of analog skills that still attend to radio, antennas and propagation and the effect of noise and interference. They're unique to radio, and they're the added skills that you might consider would give you a career advantage. Radios, of course, are more digital now, and the idea is you want to do as little as possible with analog because digital stuff benefits from Moore's Law, but they're still antennas are not cranked out in the quantities that integrated circuits are. And the other issue is the idea that systems and networks, which are maybe stand above the components and the subsystems, those are skills that you can develop in ham radio as well. And two examples that attend our club are the EME moon bounce and the ability to build and try microwave equipment. And there are others that you can think of. So going on to my own what I would call a journey to Stanford and Silicon Valley. I got interested in radio when I was 4 years old. You figure out how old I am, but I'm having a good time. And I was exposed to radio, and it was a huge thrill. And when I learned that all those sounds were from some people that were far away, and it was coming there somehow, that really hooked me. That was going to be it. I got my ham license in 1952, and at that time, I had got a job in a radio store fixing radios and TVs. That was an incredible opportunity for me to learn diagnostics, and I continue to use that even to today. It's one of those things that once you learn it, you use it. I got my ham license that year, and there was a terrific amount of support from local folks and ARRL publications that were at the local magazine stand. I was soon, making my own station, designing it and building it. I remember making holes for tube sockets by drilling a circle of holes and then filing it to the right size. Boy, that was a lot of work, especially in a steel chassis. But it got done. And I'm not sure how I survived the wooden tower that I nailed together with a ham friend, or the ride home on a bicycle carrying antenna tubing for a Yagi antenna. And I built around amplifier tubes that a club member who was the chief engineer at a local TV station distributed them in club meetings with a stern warning about the fact they needed 6,000 volts and he didn't want to read about us in the newspaper. I was at that time something of a high school athlete, and being a competitive sort, I soon got interested in radio contesting, which has been another lifelong enjoyment that, among other things, emphasizes perseverance. I still treasure the second place California certificate I won in my first serious effort. It was quite a thrill. This was an introduction to lifelong friends and eventually to sponsors. Well, around that time, and this is ancient history, but I still remember a lot of it, a large group of high school hams in Los Angeles who used to meet on the air got together to form a radio club that was dedicated entirely to the Amateur Radio League Field Day, which many of you are familiar with. And that was then a real serious contest. I mean, it wasn't a practice. It was a unique opportunity for young folks like us to learn management and strategy. Can you imagine, a high school kid saying, yes, I'd like to be in charge of a main element of a group of 60 or 70 people, and, you would be told, look, you're not qualified. Well, we never noticed that, and so we did very well. In fact, our club, the Pacifica Radio Club, our call was K6BAG. We won field day outright twice. First place U.S., irritating the East Coast powers so much that they discontinued it as a contest. They were sure we were doing something underhanded. The secret was we had more time than anybody else. We didn't realize everybody else had to work. Although we didn't realize it then, that was an opportunity we would not have had in any other sphere. So that was a very important part of my learning. After a few years of fixing TV sets, I wanted something more, and I hated fixing things because you never met a happy person. They were upset when it was when you got the thing, and they were upset when they got it back because they said it worked better before and you charged me too much. And I was offered a summer job with a company that was just right for me. That was an outfit that made, designed, and tested antennas for aircraft bodies. They had a test setup that you climbed up into and an antenna range, and boy, it was going to be great. It was just as I was graduating from high school, and I went over there, showed up, and they weren't there. They'd gone broke, and they had disappeared. I thought I'd gone to the wrong airport, but no, they weren't there. So I needed something quick, and I got a job in a local bank, Bank of America, Culver City branch. Well, that happened to be the bank that handled the Hughes Aircraft payroll account. And I was among the people who had to take all these huge piles of checks and do something with them. And I got excited about how much the engineers were paid there. They were getting so much every month. I wanted that. So it turns out that Hughes Aircraft was run by a group of ham radio operators, a group of hams. And I called the guy in charge, very cheeky of me, and he said they'd be happy to hire me as soon as I was 18 and they could insure me. So, and that happened. I started as a technician, and my first job was sorting transistors for whatever they were good for, measuring them, and then polishing them up and writing on what they were, putting them in various containers. So that's a very lucky example of a chain of contingent events that led to a career in radar technology, particularly Doppler radar and its requirement for stable solid-state oscillators that incorporated nonlinear frequency multipliers. So by accident, the disappearance of one opportunity through ham radio led to another. I worked at Hughes summers, weekends, all the time I was in college and grad school, and I have to say I learned as much from ham radio and from my work in radar as I did in school. And my first publications resulted at MIT from the interconnection among all these streams. I chose Stanford for my PhD work in large part because I'd been attracted to the ham radio publications of Professor Mike Villard, W6QYT, who was at that time the faculty advisor for the club. And I was soon designing and building equipment for his ionospheric experiments. We had a wonderful station on the hill where there are now professors' houses, and we had a big wire rhombic antenna that ran down near the oldest Hewlett-Packard plant on the hill on Page Mill, and we often got complaints that we had to shut down because they were testing equipment and our signal was getting into their stuff. But it was a great location. It was a wonderful station. At the time, the university was involved in lots of experimenting, ionospheric experiments going on in Antarctica, and all the equipment that came back was stored in a big Quonset hut full of Collins transmitters and receivers, the big deal at the time. So W6YX was as well outfitted then as it is today. And so, that was really an amazing stroke of luck for me to make that choice, which largely depended on a combination of academics and interest in ham radio. A little aside, when I was at MIT, I was active in their ham club, W1 Mike X-ray, but I got kicked out because I used a broom handle to reach in through the chicken wire and push the link into the amplifier to get a little more power out, and they thought that was too risky, so they told me to leave it alone. But luckily I survived and went on to other things. Well, out of not exactly lack of things to do, when I was a grad student, I also took up auto racing on a shoestring as a new avocation. I'd always been interested in cars, but this was the first time with a Hughes Fellowship that I could afford to have a very inexpensive car that I could devote entirely to racing. I had an old Porsche bathtub speedster, and it was a very interesting start for me. I was really grateful for Hughes and their fellowship, and once I had my PhD, I went back to work there, where I was an engineer, even though they still thought of me as Davey the technician, which was one of the problems. You never outgrow your first impression. But I was working developing signal sources for Doppler radar and for the first synchronous satellites. And I got a really thorough education in what it took and especially the requirement for low phase noise, which is uniquely a requirement of Doppler radar. And I also saw in the SYNCOM project how to run a really successful project. They really knew what to do. They put us all in one big room, and they said, nobody goes out of here until the satellite goes out those double doors at the end, and I don't care what else you want to think about, but while you're here, you're working for us. And it was really a great project. On the slide is a picture of the two, the project manager, Hal Rosen, and the chief engineer, both of whom were hams, and both of whom appreciated my ham background. While I was at Hughes, a government customer, a fellow named Bill Saunders, who was sort of the government guru of Doppler radar, came around to see what we were up to as part of his duties, and he somehow took an interest in what I was doing, and he invited me. I'd written a whole bunch of memos. I had one summer where I thought writing memos was how you got famous, so I wrote 30 or 40, and so he was exposed to those, and he invited me to join a new IEEE committee that was working to establish standards for frequency stability in the new areas of Doppler radar and particularly space communications. The ability to transmit signals from space depended on the invention of the phase lock loop to find a weak signal and lock onto it. Otherwise, you couldn't have had the kind of links that are possible in narrowband links that are now used for all kinds of space links. And that was newly dependent on phase noise. So this opened the door to much of what I've professionally accomplished since. It was a group of people, the best people in the subject, and me. And I learned from all of them. It was just the most amazing collegial experience. And I ended up writing a paper while I was working with them that has since become the most cited paper in the field. So I really was very fortunate. Again, contingent event that played in my favor. Well, at Hughes, I found myself frustrated at lack of opportunities for advancement. It was a more mature outfit, and it had been around for a while, so all the upper slots were filled, and I was told I had to wait a decade and maybe I could do something, and I didn't want to wait. I again talked to Professor Villard about what to do next. I called him up and then came up here and visited from L.A. I had applied to several established outfits, but he convinced me to follow his introduction to a local Stanford startup, of which he was an investor and a director, and it was in what would later become known as Silicon Valley. There, with the connections I'd made in the IEEE committee, I was able to start my own separate lab and product line and signal sources for radar. So you can see sort of how this works. When the company was sold 4 years later, I asked Mike again for his recommendation. And he by then knew me well enough to fund an independent startup. And he said, well, you can start your own outfit. And he wrote me a blank check on an airplane. I talked to him on an airplane, long trip to Washington, D.C., about what I had in mind and what I thought I could do. And he said, here, and he pulled out an old briefcase and one of the old-fashioned checkbooks, and he wrote me a check and signed it, but didn't put an amount in, and said, don't put in more than $250,000 because I want to have enough money around in case you need more. Well, that was a fortune then and now. And I had a company overnight. It was just an amazing example of sponsorship. Well, my interest was in starting a company to capitalize what I knew, my know-how and reputation in low phase noise signal sources for radar, and then expand it to other areas. Now, this fellow Bill Saunders, who sponsored me with the IEEE committee, appeared again almost in the first day as our first customer. And the company was able to become quite a success. And 25 years later, I retired, saying a very fond goodbye to some 2,000 employees, and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I mentioned one of the papers I'd written as part of the IEEE committee had, in the meantime, without me even paying any attention to it, become a very widely cited reference. And that was very gratifying to me to see as another sign of the benefit of sponsorship. Well, within a week or so, I was contacted by one of Professor Villard's faculty colleagues at Stanford, also a ham, Bob Hellowell, and an original investor in my company and a director. And he said, well, would you like to join the faculty? Did you ever think about teaching? And boy, that really sounded great. That was over 25 years ago. I'm still here. During that time, I was able to play an active role in the establishment of Wi-Fi and other modern microwave communications. And I've really enjoyed teaching and more recently writing about the history of one of the people who was a key instigator, but relatively unknown, of the modern Stanford and Silicon Valley, W.W. Hansen, who is recognized as the founder of my own field in microwave electronics. And so I feel I owe it to him to complete this long work on biography. And I have some, the other day I looked, I have some 4,000 or 5,000 documents. I've written snippets, and I have an equal number of archival references that I have clogging up my computers. I'm really enjoying it, and I'll get it done, especially now that I'm here hunkered down. So let's go then to the next slide, which is the one with the race car on it, number 4. I want to talk about what I guess I would refer to as the parallel universe of avocation. And I hope you can see the value of lessons that an avocation can provide that can carry over into a professional life. First of all, I found that competition away from professional activities allowed the realization of much higher goals. What do I mean like that? Well, if I wanted to race a car in Indianapolis, the answer would be no. You know, who are you? You know, our racers drive. You know, they race 400 days a year, and you know, they've been at it for their entire life, and they're much better than you. We don't need you. So you can see that professional racing was certainly out for me, but this amateur opportunity provided a harvest of lessons that I was later able to apply to my career. Well, the first lesson has to do with segmentation. I've been racing for years in my little Porsche and its successors with very little real success. I really liked it. It was great to be on a race course going fast. The camaraderie was terrific. It's similar to ham radio in that everybody will give you the shirt off their back and help you figure out any problem. But I didn't win anything. And a colleague, a fellow that was a vice president working with me, pointed out that after he'd come and watched, that there are racing classes where there were either professional drivers from a counterpart professional series, or they were classes that were used as showcases for manufacturers. And I didn't have the ability of the drivers or the sponsorship of the drivers who were professional, and I certainly didn't have the resources of manufacturers who were determined to make their car look good. So I had neither the skills, the time, nor the resources to compete in those classes, which I was trying. But, he said, there are 2 classes I've noticed in which neither of those apply. Classes for amateur engineers, builders, and racers like you, like me. Well, I saw the light, and I bought an old former champion car. It was a few years past its prime, but I got in it, and I won my first race with it. I was staggered. It wasn't easy, but I did it. And from that time on, I won almost all of my races, and I won 2 national championships, amateur championships in sports car racing. So what a lesson. The lesson was that my skills in project management and engineering set me apart in that particular segment, so I was differentiated in that segment. And that eventually carried over, I realized, into my professional life to the great benefit of my company. It told us how and when to invest, and where, and what to avoid. So segmentation and differentiation learned from racing, and also to a lesser degree from ham radio contesting, applied to a personal career and to professional activities as well. What a lesson. It was really very interesting to learn that. In addition to my long appreciation from having worked at the radio store in the techniques of diagnostics, which, to be brief, are you play 20 questions, and you ask questions that have equal probable answers. You don't try to shoot the moon. You want to get maximum information gain with each question. I could see also that there was a range of project management techniques that I used professionally, and then even taught here in my lab course at Stanford. There's a memo somewhere around that I have occasionally unearthed about project management ideas. And among the principles I really admire are the idea that you put showstoppers first. You avoid investment that you could have seen at the beginning to be fruitless. You don't waste all the money and time, and you don't risk Secondly, you avoid compound risk. That is, you don't try to develop components and the systems that use them. That's compound risk. If one of them doesn't get you, the other one may. And in racing, I learned over and over again, you don't make last-minute changes that can have an unexpected side effect. I used to call that don't change plugs between practice and a race. And I can think of at least 3 sad stories from ham radio and racing in which somebody violated that rule, including me, and the result was it didn't work out. So, and a person who might have won a contest or a race didn't. So it's a very strong rule for me. Don't change things at the last minute. You see it all the time in software where there's a glitch that shows up. Who'd have thought that? And a slight change results in the whole system crashing. So you all have experienced the same thing. I also gained a very much increased appreciation of what it takes, the idea of system integration, and how that's a skill all its own. And how much time it takes to integrate a full system and get it all working. And that's especially risky if you haven't confirmed all the components first. You don't want to have a risk in both areas. And so I like to design systems that have individual components that are independently replaceable, by their substitute, and whose characteristics you can measure within themselves rather than requiring you put the whole system together before you can see if the components are working. So that was a real lesson. It applies to carburetors, it applies to electronics. Wherever I see in the world that people are trying to do components and systems at the same time, I see risk. And I think you can imagine how that works. All the checkered flags, I have a lot of checkered flags in the garage, and I was visited by a racing friend, and he said, "Where'd you buy those?" And I won them. I won each one of them. Each one of them had a lot of sweat and trouble. The championships, the fact that I got to marry my dear pit crew, who's here laughing at me, and our 40-plus world championships in our Galapagos Islands ham station, contest station, those all encourage me to really appreciate the value of experience gained without professional risk or cost. And also, I have to say, the memory of the adventures warm us in these very trying times. Now on to the next slide. Must be 6. Peak, so I don't lead you astray. Nope, it's 5. So I mentioned some examples of some successful outcomes from amateur radio beginnings. First of all, Joe Taylor, who many of you are aware of. If you don't know him, he's the guy who's responsible for many of the amateur communications digital techniques that are used today, WSJT and all of its offspring. He was a kid ham. And he says amateur radio led him into his career as a radio astronomer, and he also referenced that he learned a lot at key moments from 2 books by Ron Bracewell, our dear departed colleague, and that he discovered pulsars, which led to his Nobel Prize. And pulsars are the basis of today's LIGO. How did that happen? Well, he observed over a number of years there was a gradual slowing resulted from in the pulsar rate, and concluded that resulted from gravitational radiation, which you ought to be able to detect, which that underlay the development of today's LIGO. And Barb and I were in a group with Joe visiting the LIGO laboratory in Louisiana, and I can tell you, he was received with red carpet treatment. Boy, they were all over him, and it was a real thrill to see how recognized this former high school ham was. I'm sure you're familiar with all of his contributions to ham radio digital communications, which is a wonderful add-on to the work he's done. Professor Marner is here at Stanford, where he's led the chemistry department, and but also been very active in amateur radio. He credits amateur radio for his first interest in the technology that led to his Nobel Prize. And even though he has a great number of claims on his time, he and his wife Sharon are both extremely devoted to the amateur radio emergency service. Our club is almost alone in the world, and having a Nobel laureate associated with us. So it's quite a thrill. Always accused of relishing ancient history. You know, I'll do that for a minute. There's a lot less known nowadays that the careers of Fred Terman and Herb Hoover Jr. and Charlie Litton all originated in ham radio. You remember perhaps that in the pre-1927 days, there was no prefix for countries. They had no idea people would talk from one country to another until around that time. So Fred was 6AE. Herb Hoover had many calls, including 6SR. Litton was 6AO. Bill Hansen, who, among other things, patented the Doppler radar that formed the beginnings of my own professional career, was 6CSY, and also an amateur pilot. And David Packard, whom I had the great fortune to know and admire, was 9DRV, and he's quoted often as saying that ham radio at Stanford led directly to Hewlett Packard, and it appeared to be so. So these folks, plus a more modern thing for me, which was my sponsorship on multiple occasions from Professor Villard and from Bill Saunders, really impressed me with the possibilities of ham radio as one avenue to mentorship and sponsorship. The interventions that occurred at key moments in my life were the very definition of contributions to the contingent chain of events in my own life. So it's very interesting to look forward, and I hope maybe that those of you who are early in your career can do that and be on the lookout for things like this that can have a tremendous impact. You're not all asleep yet, but I'll wrap up quickly here. The final slide, I'm trying to answer the question, what about now? I had a startling occasion where I was talking to a Stanford administrator about the value of the ham radio club to Stanford's interest in the growing matric culture, the D school, and so forth. And the answer was, do people still do that? Oh, I said yes, but we thought we had better. That was the impetus for a display we put on at the Alumni Center a few years ago, an attempt to show the history and the value of the amateur radio club and its membership to the university. Not sure if we had the effect we wanted, but it was interesting. And on the final slide, there's a link to some pictures from it. It's certain that things have changed a lot. And if there ever was a golden age of HF radio, high-frequency ionospheric radio, which was and still is one of my main interests, it's faded to a much smaller position now. A lot of the problems are solved. But radio and wireless, they're very key to today's device mobility. You have an iPhone in your pocket or on your table, and it has at least 4 radios for cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS, maybe more. And I've always been impressed by the fact that a few years ago it was pointed out there are more wireless connections than the total population of the world. It's just amazing. In fact, the population of iPhones is a good portion of the population of the world. So radio is far from dead, but it's taken different forms, primarily microwave. But amateur radio still remains a unique opportunity for maker and for experimental experience, and as well as for testing oneself in competition, and for finding relationships that could result in that scarce but valuable holy grail mentors and sponsors. So our club happens to be extremely well equipped, and all around you are associates who may be able to provide you the experiences you can find nowhere else. These can carry over into academic and professional pursuits if you let them, and in the end, it's up to you. The door is open, and it's your opportunity actively to seek out things that may enhance your life and your career. So with that, on the last slide, I've listed some references, links that you might find interesting. and let me break and see if anybody heard any of this and if there are any questions. I also am watching email, and if you want to email me a question, Leeson@stanford.edu.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Lots of history, lots of interesting stories, and lots of things to think about. Does anyone have any questions for Dave? I have one then. Can you tell us some about the history of the shack? Where was it before it was up on the hill, and how did that happen?
Good question.
Go ahead with the question.
Back before it was on the hill, you made reference to the current tackle. Yeah.
Okay, I think the question was where was the shack before it was where it is now. When I was a grad student, the shack was on the hill that fronts on Page Mill Road and is north of what is now the expressway, Foothill Expressway. And it was built either pre-war or during the war with money from Mike Villard, who came from a very wealthy family, and by hand by Bob Hellowell, both of whom wanted it both for ionospheric experiments when the war was over, but also they wanted it for a ham shack. And because Mike had sponsorship, he was able to requisition phone poles and wire antennas of almost any type, and we had a huge rhombic that was aimed at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, which of course was a great direction for anything in contesting in the United States, and it really cut a swath, especially on 40 meters. That area is now full of houses, and that shack is long gone. The original ham shack was in the fire station on campus before that. Then it was in the upstairs lab of Fred Terman in the small buildings back of the quad, in a building which is still called the Terman Building, I believe. And then it became the one on the hill. Then it somehow ended up at near the farm, the barn, the Stanford barn, and that was also the location of KZSU. And when there was interference with the ham station and the studio, the university actually paid quite a bit to have the whole ham station moved up to the hilltop where it is now. That's my recollection of the history of it. I'm not sure of the years, but I was involved in figuring out where to put the towers and what sort of antennas we should have, and just the general idea of how to take advantage of the terrain, which has worked out pretty well.
W6YX monthly meeting. We're talking with Dave Leeson. Does anyone have any questions for him?
Getting an echo. What do you see as possible research topics in the HF or VLF frequency ranges?
Hey, question is, what do I see as a possible HF or VLF research project? Well, that's a funny question for a microwave guy, but I'll do my best. I've always been interested in the impact, and I've given many talks and written papers on the idea that the impact of terrain on propagation from antennas sited over sloping foreground. But that's, now there's software that does that. I have to say the software is all two-dimensional, and it has some obvious limitations, but seems to satisfy people in that regard. I think that I would defer to someone in that business that is closer to it. My mentor in teaching at Stanford was Professor Enan, who's now in Turkey, but available by email, and I'd direct that kind of question to him. But from the standpoint of amateur radio, I think the idea is that many of these things that otherwise would require big funding, writing a grant proposal, writing a proposal to get the right to put the equipment together and so forth, can all be done with amateur equipment. I'm recalling two graduate students who came here to our station and did a very interesting experiment with backscatter using ham rigs, and were able to map out the maximum usable frequency in all directions at all hours from this direction, and match it to a published map, and showed that they had actually reached up and touched the ionosphere and measured it with very simple equipment. So I guess I don't have in mind, it's kind of caught me out, I don't have in mind a specific answer to that question, but I think the answer is to pursue it with people in the club who are interested in that. I would say that there are still two giant log periodics that are left over from experiments with round the world propagation, and those I think are still operable, although much of the equipment has either been taken away or worse. But the resources from at Stanford are still extensive in that area, and the ability to string a wire between phone poles is something that every VLF researcher prizes. So I'm sorry I can't answer it in more detail, but I think that there have to be still some major unanswered questions and ways to get started in ham radio. Let me give you a totally different example. In my lab class, I had at the end of each year, each quarter, a set of projects that were shown off in a sort of like a field day. Were taken on by one of the America's Cup team. I have no idea how it came out, but I thought it was a great example of how you can begin a project on an amateur level or a small lab level, and then it can bring you to something bigger.
Any more questions for Dave out there? This is AG6WH. Oh, that's good then. What's your next project? What are you working on now?
I'm still writing the Hansen book, and as I mentioned, I recently got back into it. We have supposedly lots of time, Turns out that everything seems to break when you want to use it here, so we've got lots of sidetracks. And I realized that I write by making little snippets and then assembling them into chapters and those into parts and so forth. And I've done that over and over again to a point where I'm not sure whether I finished part of it or not. And I decided to start over with an outline and a table of contents and a list of all the documents. And I realized that I have something like 10,000 documents in my computer. Half of them I've written, and half of them are copies, photos or otherwise, of archival documents, particularly from the Stanford archives and from the National Archives and the MIT archives. And I'm determined to get that book finished in public, plus a companion volume that publishes, along with a history of radar, Hansen's notes on microwaves that were the classified secret first book on microwaves and radar that were published at the MIT Rad Lab in 1940, and on which I think all other books on microwaves are based, but nobody ever had a copy until the internet came along and I could chase around and find them. Anyhow, that's my main project, is finishing that book and its companion, and I'm determined.
We're looking forward to it. It sounds like a lot of fun to read. How about radio projects? Are you building anything or playing with anything?
Primarily no. I've still got the old station here in front of me. I have a pair of old Kenwood rigs and a pair of old Alpha amplifiers, and my friends have stopped coming over to operate contests, of which we've won many from this location. The last contest I was in, amazingly enough, I won. I got the only 10-meter opening of anybody, and so had 30 extra multipliers, and came out with a first-place plaque. I have a good friend who came the next year who's really a much better contester and won it again, so the station works well. Things keep breaking. I have little projects like a direction indicator made out of a compass chip that I can put on an antenna so I don't have to have a potentiometer that fills with water. It stops working, and a bunch of other things like that. But frankly, I've tried to put those aside and prioritize keeping my head in juggling all those ideas in the Hansen project.
Sounds like you're very busy. Are there any other questions from either over the air or from the internet? Thank you a lot for the stories and taking the time. We really appreciate it. And thanks a lot. And a reminder about Leah, ITV, and practice on Saturday morning, which you should have gotten an email about, and hopefully quite a few of you will decide to give that a shot.
It's been a great pleasure, W6NL.
W6ITV.
Go ahead, ITV.
I just wanted to add a little bit to the story of the move up onto the hill. When the station left the hill behind Ryan Lab, which I was fortunate enough to experience when I was a student, it came down sort of by where the environmental health and safety is now. And actually what happened is when we were building the SunNet cable TV system, the ham stuff interfered with cable TV, and so comm services paid for the move up onto the hill. We had a lot of fun down there before moving into the hill too. Mike Heidemann, I'm operator can speak to that. He was quite a terror from there.
Anyone else have stories or comments from that time?
I would say more, but the echo gets to me.
KX6 Tango, I would just like to add a
Yeah, Blaine KX6T was involved in those days too. Back to you, John. G6WH, WA6ITV.
K6XT, you got cut off there. You were going to say something. Any other stories people would like to tell? Okay, then before we close, anyone from the club want to say anything about upcoming activities, or I assume field day is probably not happening, but it'd be good to know that for sure. Anyone have any news? Let's say G6WH.
Well, I guess that's probably my job. Yeah, so field day's obviously coming up next month. We're thinking about how we can maybe do remote operation for field day, but no firm plans there yet. Probably we'll discuss details in the meeting early next month, EJ6IB.
Is field day still officially happening?
Oh, good question. I think I was looking at the website today, and I didn't see any announcement saying it was canceled, but that's probably a good thing to keep an eye on.
What's the status with the access to the ham shack? Is that forbidden at this point, or is that possible?
As far as I'm aware, people who have card access or the code to the gate can still get up there. For those who don't have that sort of off-hours access, the gates are obviously closed during the day, so they're not going to be able to get in.
And what would it take for remote control of the transmitter?
Details there are still kind of getting worked out. I assume that we're going to try to get something, over the internet, remote control, to send people in to rig things up and then get control over the internet working. But details there are a little bit lacking at the moment.
There's also the radio in Packard, which you can get to over the internet. It doesn't have as well placed an antenna by any means, but it would work.
Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Probably the officers of W6IX will be meeting kind of later this month, going into our next meeting of the full group, and we'll kind of try to brainstorm some ideas there, keeping all these things in mind.
Well, thank you. Are there any further announcements or comments or anything anyone else would like to bring up?
WA6ITV?
Go ahead, ITV.
I haven't heard anyone mention it here, but Brad in 6BD checked in on the Monday night net last night and reported that he had straightened out the shack phone. It was paid up and should be operational.
What was that? I didn't quite catch that.
The telephone line to the shack, apparently, maybe the bill didn't get paid or something. Anyway, he's sorted it out and paid it up, and it was his understanding that the phone line to the shack on the hill was operational again. That was Brad in 6BDE who had done that.
Yeah, thank you to N6BD. That's great.
And of course, this is his repeater that we're using, so kudos to Brad. WA6ITV.
Okay, and with that, I think that seems to be the end of the announcement. So we'll close the W6YX meeting for tonight. And thank you all for tuning in, and especially thanks to Dave Leeson for telling us about the history of ham radio from his perspective and something about the club. That was really fun to hear. Hope to hear you all again next month and in person at some point in the not too distant future. This is AG6WH, clear.